Just say, hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here and being able to be part and listening to those healing stories here. Today, we've got Rudy Garcia here, who is sharing his story with us in the hope to spark some hope for you and inspiration on that journey. So please, Rudy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what do you...
Okay, I'm from the Dallas, Texas area in the USA. A history of trauma, and it's even been diagnosed like CPTSD also, chronic. And a lot of it started with some abuse, sexual abuse by a paternal male cousin. I was like 5, 6 years old. And it was neglected by my mom because she feared, what my dad might do. And he was like a rageaholic. And so it was just an issue which was neglected. And I ended up stuttering and being bullied. Mm-hmm. And I started drinking alcohol at 9 years old, oh, wow. Kind of like a coping mechanism. It was readily available at the house, and by 13 or so, I was already blacking out, and even went through 2 alcohol poisoning events, which I was brought back from. I had difficulty through school, throughout the whole school process, and didn't really have friends or anything, and just got into a lot of fights, and that alcohol, of course, and I was intervened upon at age 32 with the alcohol.
Wow, so alcohol stayed the coping mechanism.
Right, and I had lost a marriage due to the drinking, and I had an accident at work, and then that's what brought on the intervention that was performed, and that was in 1987, and I've been sober since, 34 years.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It really wasn't much about emotional sobriety, though. Yeah. Because I was very much like a lot of my history started waking up from the trauma as a kid. And I did lots of therapy through the years, and as well as I left that particular job and then went to school to become a counselor.
Wow. So what did you find most helpful in that time when you were giving up alcohol? Because I was drinking myself too. And when you give up alcohol, it really brings up different emotional storms and memories. And it's hard to get to this.
I know that the alcohol gave me like a way to live, which really wasn't to my liking, so to speak. It was more or less behavior which was being exhibited by, I guess, the males, adult males in my family. So I thought it was okay to be drinking and just, being not appropriate and all that stuff. So when I did come to the end of my drinking life there, I was really pleased in a lot of ways because I saw that there was still a part of me where a lot of that behavior wasn't me. And it was just like pleasant to not be going through remorse and guilt for continued behaviors associated with the drinking. But like I was making mention, I still had emotional setbacks. And I even look at it like choosing that field more or less like it chose me.
Yeah.
And I even looked at it like I needed to teach what I taught what I needed to learn. That's what I pretty much told folks. I did that stuff, that field for 20 years.
As a counselor, helping other
yes,
people. Yeah, wow.
right.
You really
And
turned your suffering into helping other people. That's beautiful.
It was like 1 year into my sobriety. So there's pros and cons about that, but you know, one ain't going to tell no alcoholic what to do or not to do and such. But I did so, and for the most part, I found it to be like a relief. I was very much active into introvert, but that field kind of brought me out, and through no choice of my own, and but at the same time, it was like my intuition took over when I was inebriated all those years, and equally it seemed to carry me when I was in this new state of life and sobriety. I ended up losing a second relationship because of sobriety, because I sobered up. It was more functional with me drinking. So, so I lost one because of drinking, and I lost the second one because I quit drinking.
Wow.
But I still pursued, sobriety and counselorship.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of, found myself delivering a lot of hope and inspiration to people, what I experienced, and all kind of different settings, from prisons to private sector to what they call methadone clinics for the opiates, and probably the biggest population I worked was with the criminal justice folks, and in the nonprofit sector. I just couldn't buy into the idea where the private sector was about more interest in the money than in human lives. So I did a little bit of private work there towards the last private sector work, but it was more in the supervision capacity, because my education was more so like a continuing education and not necessarily the academic route. So I picked substance abuse counseling and had to do like a practicum and all that kind of stuff, and classroom hours and all. But I found myself, like I was saying, just imparting with a lot of hope and inspiration to people. And that lifted me a lot. It really was. Go ahead, please.
Do you think it's given you some meaning and a purpose in your life? Like, even knowing you had that childhood that didn't set you up for any success or any of that kind of stuff, not even, you didn't have the loving and the support or in growing up, but now here you are supporting adult being, and you probably could see beyond their addiction that they're broken hearts, really, or even the tough guys, they come from broken families and they're hurting, and you probably could connect with that a lot better than probably other counselors, but we didn't have any experience like that.
And then I ended up, saying things or sharing things which I myself needed to hear. I realized, and that's why I made the comment, like, I taught what I needed to learn, And I did a lot of work with anger, people with anger. It seems like I deviated a lot from just the straight alcohol and drug arena and went more towards resolving anger with folks. Because I went to, took some schooling or training in New York back about the early 90s where it was about behavior modification.
Yeah.
And it was in a prison setting. And it was, in fact, immersion training that they called it, where the inmates had hold of us and they taught us. And we were part of they and they were part of us. So it wasn't no we versus they type dichotomy, you know. And
It's beautiful,
but
isn't it?
I was pretty good at skills of dissociating and detaching. So I just like survival skills. And so I just employed those when I was in some pretty overwhelming times with that work. That ended up giving me about 4 years of work in 3 separate prisons.
Yeah, wow. And how did you manage that it didn't overwhelm you? Because when you're in those environments, you see a lot of suffering and you still have your own kind of wounds. And how did you?
Well, it's like I said to you, I dissociated, I disconnected, you know. I was sober, but I still had those kind of skills in place. They really hadn't been challenged or anything. But I saw how they later improved my personal being because it brought about ability to quit being passive and or passive aggressive and more assertive.
Yes.
And I ended up meeting another woman. That was one thing that was pretty supreme with my addiction, was how it just transferred over into relationships as well. And a big issue with codependency and all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't able to do too well myself alone. I remember hearing like alcoholics and addicts don't take mates, they take hostages, you know. And so I was doing that in a sense. And this person was a recovering individual as well. And to kind of make a long story short with that, she ended up returning back to drugs and alcohol, maybe at about a 15-year mark after we being together. After the death of her mom, she kind of like deteriorated. They were real close and had even like a friendship aside from a mother and daughters type relationship. But it was just difficult for her. She had had an accident at work where it required back and neck surgery for her, and it wasn't successful. And so she was put on opiates to kind of help her with that, along with fusions, which they did on her back and neck. So that kind of brought some of the drugs back into her life. Lots of drug-seeking behaviors, and here I was, still, sober.
Yeah, and how did you manage it? It would have been really hard to seeing her deteriorating or going back that way while you remain.
What I did is I just got active in support group system, like AA and such. And I remember towards the last, I just took her into a hospital and pretty much just let go. And I don't know how, to be honest with you, because like I told you, lots of times my intuition has taken care of me when I wasn't always conscious of what was going on. But that was pretty much like towards the last of what I was seeing of her. and then we ended up like a separation, and that was I'm trying to. Anyway, I found out later on that she had overdosed, and maybe like a couple of years afterwards, after it happened.
Yeah.
And that was pretty devastating. But here I was still sober. And
Yeah.
I ended up burning out from that industry, counseling. There towards the last, they put me to work with domestic violence offenders because I was able to do anger work. And then they used to tell me, well, you can't really change these people. They're sociopaths or whatever. You ain't going to break them down or whatever. You're just going to teach them things, some dialectic work, I guess they call it, educational. But I remember telling my supervisor, I can break these guys down. I mean, it's in a way I did, but she said she don't want to go, don't want to do that kind of work. Let's just do this other stuff that we're trained to do. But it just let me know, affirm my abilities that, I was pretty good with people's feelings, and I was humble and honest and sincere in my delivery of my work. So
you had a lived experience. When you
yes,
have a lived experience, you can connect with other people on a different level, especially if you're very intuitive about that.
Right. And then it was like going through that turmoil at home with that relationship just deteriorating. It had effect on me too. Thankfully, not to the point of taking back alcohol, but I ended up like just burning out from the industry, and I left it like around 2007, and I entered it like around 1980, 88 or so, after I sobered up in 87. So it was just like about a year short of 20 years,
Wow.
And then I ended up becoming homeless, and I sought, shelters and all that, and I worked my way back to my home state of Texas, which at that time I was in her state of Oregon, up in the northwest part of the country, above California and such. But when I came back and started to just reestablish myself down in Texas, then is when I found out of her overdose through just reading or something. Every now and then I would seek people from my past and see what what might be up, and that's how I found like an obituary or something. Then by that time I had taken on another woman, and this was maybe like around 2008. So we're just talking about a year later.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, well, that particular one came through like an internet relationship, and it had to do some with her connection to God. I pretty much sought spirituality throughout the whole time. I just couldn't connect on the religious side, but on the spiritual side, the way AA was introduced to me, it's more spiritual than religious. So that kind of stuck with me. But so that was some of the attraction to this woman. And she was online, I think I told you, and to kind of make it a bit different, she was from Africa, from Kenya.
Yeah.
And and then I had come into some money through an automobile accident, which I had many years earlier, 8 10 years or so. And so I received some money from that, and that allowed me to go visit her over there in Kenya. And this was in 2008. And then we married out there. And then I came back to the States, and then it was about maybe an 18-month process of immigrating, or however the term might be.
Yeah.
And then she came later on. Then I had noticed before, when I was over there 3 months in Africa on my term of my visa, or whatever it might be called, that she would binge drink. And but then she had some friends, girlfriends, who would kind of help her to get off of that activity. But then she started doing that over here in the States too. And I kind of found out that she too was abused as a child, and had no real opportunity to process any of that, being a third world country out there.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't able to help her. And I took her into the hospital one night for them to help her, like with at least a detox process or something, or get that going. But they said, no, she was all right, blah, blah, blah. And then I remember when I took her home that I threw away all the alcohol, after that. And then the next day, I didn't give it no thought, went on into work. I was working as a security officer then. I was already, had left the counseling industry, and it was even recommended to don't get back into it because I don't got too much stability going on with my own life, emotional wise, So, but a big turning point came when she took her life. And I found, I was going to work one, I don't know if this is trigger material or not, but in a way, I was just sharing pieces, kind of like spontaneous, like.
Yeah, maybe not the details of it, but that is
But
really.
I was taking a shower, preparing to go to work on the Sunday morning. And I would check on her, and she was just on the floor, and she was crying and all this and that. And when I got out of the shower, then I looking for her, and I couldn't find her. And then I kind of saw her legs kind of like by the closet. And I know oftentimes she would pray in the closet. So I thought that that's what she was doing.
Wow.
But as I had approached her to go check on her, then I found out that she had hung herself on like where you hang clothes and things like that in the closet. So I cut her down and did CPR and all of that. And at one time I wanted to slit my throat while I was doing that. I just was very overwhelmed. And I remember just like crying out to God, help me, because I was very impulsive and I was just fearful of what I might do to myself. Then some calmness came about me, and it's like I was almost experiencing myself from up above, watching myself doing CPR on her, all calm and everything. And then the emergency medical services showed up maybe 10 minutes later. This was 10 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. And then they worked on her like for 50 minutes, 50, and then they pronounced her dead at 11 a.m. And all that time I had a social worker talking to me. because they just had like the police whisk me out of there, out of the closet, out of the bedroom.
Yeah.
And that was very difficult too, because like, what did I do wrong? But then, I understood later on that pretty much fits protocol of what they have to do. I was cleared of it, of course, thankfully, or however it might be. But that social worker referred me to a support group, a grief support group.
See, yeah.
And I was by myself, so I pretty much immersed myself in that group. And since I had a little bit of counseling skills, I even helped them, to with people who were in the grief process. And
isn't it interesting that even in that moment when you are grieving so badly, you're still supporting other people? Well, this is that.
I had a therapist tell me, one of the last ones, that I'd been trying to help myself through people all my life, and so it kind of made sense. But a fellow in one of those groups referred me to his therapist and to do the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That stuff worked for me. Let me tell you, I heard it doesn't.
Yeah,
it sure did. EMDR, it did. And so I kind of like a transformation started with me at that time, and that's been like, she took her life in 2011, so it's been already going on 11 years. In June, I was about 6 years by myself, and I was about 4 years of that was a lot of hard grief, and but it was also like a birthing of a new me at the same time.
Wow.
And then I met another woman. Here I go again with the women, just constantly into the meeting aspect. But this one wasn't like before. We ended up meeting on an online support group for widows and widowers.
Yeah.
And she had just lost her husband at that time, which was around 2017 when we met. And she had lost him like a year prior to that, to a combination heart and or stroke.
Yeah.
But the real kicker was that 9 days later, she lost her son to a drug overdose.
Wow.
And so I think maybe intensity or gravity or severity of pain that we both had experienced pretty much brought us together, and both of us into some latter years. I'm 67 now, so this was about 62 years old I was, and she's a few years older than me, but to this day we're still together. And it's kind of like finally something that has some positive and healthy elements to it.
And is it like nurturing both ways?
Right.
Not just you giving and you being of support to others. Maybe you can now let a little bit of that come into you.
Right. And then all the years of being a counselor and learning things, it's like I stored all that information, and then I was able to pull it out in this new me.
Yeah.
And I can pretty much say that in my life, I've expended most of my time unlearning old stuff than learning new. And
Beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. I hope everyone really picked that up, that unlearning the old and learning new, and how you said the new you. We can constantly reinvent ourselves, can't we? We don't have to stay that version. And it's
right,
powerful to know that and see and hear that you did that, that
right.
powerful.
And then I would pretty much throughout my time go to church. I was raised in church. It's just that I had turned away from it. But I would go back, not always believing in what they had to say now, but I know it was a safe place for me, And so I did a lot of things like that. Like I told you, from my learnings as a counselor, lots of things were just like proactive, and probably one of the better ones being to where I started to reach out, to people in that arena, where more so in the past, not so. It would just be with like 12-step recovery oriented groups. But at the same time, I noticed myself that I was getting more strong in this new me, even to the point where confidence and self-esteem was coming about. Positive regard for self, and equally things like learning to nurture myself. And I did a lot of meditation also, and exercises along that line, to where, yes, in the past I was pretty big at isolating and withdrawing. So I kind of still had similar behavior, but I was engaging in reading self-help and things along that nature, to where I even used to call it flossing the mind, like I would floss the mind,
I love that. Yeah, floss the mind.
Yeah, and I learned a lot from this woman too, because she's pretty independent, pretty bold, pretty assertive, and all those kind of things. And this, my own nature would not jive with that. But yet I did see that, no, this new life and her, I do want to be part of. And importantly, because I see how it's helping me to change, continue change, particularly with my ways. A lot of passivity, I used to really, and before that, it was like passive aggressive behavior. So I ended up arresting the aggressive stuff, but still very much passive. And there would come times of conflict, which has not been very many of them, but I made it a point to learn from those experiences and to talk it out with her, and not just stuff it and then later on come back out like nothing happened. That used to be my way before in the past. And she says, no, I'm not going to go for none of that kind of stuff. You're going to have to,
you want to have a different experience, isn't it? A different relationship.
Yeah,
when you change, you attract different people into your life. And then when you're making yourself vulnerable enough to have those deeper conversations about when things go wrong, that it's having a healthy conflict, it's
right.
And that's
and they really haven't been many of those experiences, but whenever it did happen, they were pretty impactful for me. And I even started to learn about what it meant to thrive, because I never did. I mean, I was so much into self-sabotage, that it really impacted basically 50 years of my life, because that's how long I went without resolving that childhood stuff.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad you said that, but because I know there's so many older people watching and they feel like, oh, I'm 50, it's too late, I wasted my whole life, but you still turned it around. That's it, because you said
right. And I remember even saying that, I have no choice but to be strong. But again, I was involved in that grief support group, with every week, and even helping to co-facilitate. They would just toss me around all kind of different groups to where there was folks experiencing, new loss and such. And so it's kind of like maybe you said a little while ago, or maybe partially me, to where I didn't pick to become a counselor and help people. It more or less picked me. And
it's a natural gift of yours, is it?
But I did leave the industry though in 2007. I said, and but with that experience of homelessness that I talked about, that I went through. So, pardon my dogs here. I ended up going into a homeless program for veterans. I'm a veteran. I served in the Navy after 4 years after my high school years back in early 70s. So I took advantage of this program, and I was with it for about 6 months. And then this retired service member hired me to work in security. That's how I ended up getting in that little industry, which I told you about, which I did for 6 years, and then I retired. But it kind of had to do with, I was still going through some, my biggest thing I found out was that I had fear of men in authority positions. Because they were my abusers as a kid. I got this male cousin abusing me, and then dad was like a rageaholic and very much emotionally abusive. And and then my uncle, his brother, they were all like this. And so
it's interesting how deeply ingrained that is, that even now, what do you say, you're 67, that is still there.
Correct.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and
such a powerful impact.
He passed in 1984 at the age of 62 with cancer, and it wasn't until about 2015 that I was able to forgive him, and he'd been dead for quite some while, But I was able to do it through some PTSD groups and some spirituality groups at the Veterans Hospital that I used to attend to. And what came to my realization was that I had problem with like addressing God as our Father, how they do in the prayer. But it had to do with my connection to those words as a child, kind of had to do with reflecting upon my father. And I most certainly wasn't receiving a life that made me say our Father and God and all that kind of stuff. And I later on got to see equally that it had not to do with his person, but his behavior, that my father I'm talking about, that helped me to overcome, even though it was quite a lengthy amount of time. But I had a chaplain talk to me about that I basically had been like self-condemning from the view of religion or the Bible or what have you. And then that's what was in the way of self-forgiveness. And so
That's
it
sometimes
made a
harder,
lot,
is it? The self-forgiveness.
yeah, very difficult stuff. I mean, I would say that necessarily not, do it per se. It was just a bunch of words, but it wasn't reflecting in my own behavior. And I guess I got to equally see how so many things that I disliked about him that I equally had within my own person. And so I think oftentimes that's what a lot of the fight was about,
Yeah.
Uh,
I remember when, it's a long time ago, I went to school at a Catholic convent, and one of the nuns said to me once, I was angry about another person or what someone else did, and she said to me, whatever you don't like in other people is you. They're just a mirror. They're reflecting your behavior to you. And at the moment, I felt like I was punched or something. It really hurt, and it was sick. I think I was 16 about that time, and it took me another decade or so till I really got realized that other that we do those kind of behaviors too, and it was hard. It was hard to take in for me.
Yeah, and and I did find that I did go through the process of self-forgiveness, and but all of the let me see. See, this was after the suicide, because the suicide was in 2011, and I had already done some time by myself, about 4 years, and then my job relocated me to another city, and so I lost my connection with the support group, and but then that's when I established contact with members at the Veterans Hospital as well as staff. And then
you did a lot of group work, did you? You found group work really helpful. Like it sounds like you were members of many different kind of groups, the AA, the grief support with veterans, and
right. I and even when I was a counselor, maybe that's where I lean towards that versus individual work. More so group.
Yeah, but was the EMDR that you did, was that individual?
Yes, that part was individual. Yeah. And it kind of started, the suicide was in June. And I did that EMDR maybe like around September through around December on an outpatient basis. So it was like maybe a couple of times a week on the initial, and then, it would decrease as a little time went by. But I had already told my story millions of times, because I know that I learned early on too, through AA and all that self-disclosure leads to self-acceptance. So that was instrumental for me. It used to be a lot of pain when I would disclose, but then through time, there wasn't so much pain no more in disclosing. And it served purpose, to get people to see that, hey, I've been through that, and here I am, and I remember saying to myself many times, I'm doing this because no one ever helped me.
Wow.
So that was a lot of my devotion towards helping people.
Wow. And is this, do you think, because then when you're in a group, they have a number of people reflecting back to you that they still accept you, even knowing now that they know your past, you still accept it within that group, that helped you to accept yourself where you're at?
Yes, also that. And two, I did a lot of like generalized talk. So a lot of people could, like I could be talking to some folks directly, but it was in a generalized manner to where they didn't feel like I was pointing fingers at them, That was how a lot of my work was based on. And I think I learned that working that behavior modification through the prison system, because the inmates taught me that, and a lot of it had to do with them primarily telling me, you have to tell us what to do, because if you don't do that, we're not going to mind you, So even if it's not part of your personal makeup, just come in here and, deliver what you got to deliver, which would be a lot of times harsh deliveries, but we need to hear that, and then just exit yourself, get out of there. You don't have to stick around. So, I would learn in pieces like that, but that kind of setting also taught me about, they used to have what they call confrontation groups, like once a week, where inmates would like drop like a ticket on some behavior that some other inmates exhibited towards them during the week or something. And then here they come together once a week, and basically he delivers his concern about how this other person did him wrong, and then the recipient just has to listen and not talk back, But there was a lot of tools they would use within that setting to where that's where I learned that generalized talk, where I could be talking to people but not looking at them, Whoever needs to take it home, what I'm saying here, would take it home, and they would kind of take it like that without other people, pointing it out to them. So that was a very good tool. I remember that.
So you literally went into all those situations with like an open mind, curious, and
Right.
you were learning,
Right.
you were giving, you were supporting, but you were also learning for yourself at the same time. And that's awesome. That's a gift.
And that's why I was saying that I taught what I needed to learn, because I always read as a
I
kid.
get it
That
now.
was one of my escapes.
Yeah.
I did a lot of art as a kid too, a lot of drawing.
Yeah.
So that was another, until that alcohol started to take over,
Wow.
and then it was awful, that kind of substance. I was spared a lot of times in life, and I heard one time that God takes care of drunks and babies, and I sure do believe that, But I have to. What I picked up along the way too has been mindfulness,
Yes.
along with the spirituality. Like they used to say, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. I remember hearing that, and I used to so much be into idle mind, and it was always no good for me. And to have unresolved trauma and idle mind, it was always ill behavior associated with that. And most certainly when the alcohol was in place too, I was in blackouts, and it's a wonder I'm alive. But I know that's a story of many of us,
Yeah. And it's hard to forgive ourselves for that too, isn't it? Because it was my freaking stage there. I wasn't happy drunk, and I passed out too. And you have all this guilt and shame and all this around. It's hard to forgive yourself for how you coped back then. I always say you did the best you could with what you knew at the time, and we just
and that's what those exact words is what the facilitator of that suicide group used to say, and they stayed with me.
Yeah.
I always remember, because I used to go to all the I coulda, woulda, shoulda, done this and done that, where it's already in the past, and he used to always say, you did the best you could with the knowledge you had at the time. And you just shared that yourself. So and that's very impactful stuff there, to have received awarenesses like that. I remember when I was in the group work with veterans, and then those guys were about combat PTSD. Mine is about this childhood stuff. And I sometimes think that's more impactful because here we are. I think I read somewhere along the way that a child is formed between 4 and 7 years old. Like he or she is blueprinted for life in that span of time. And that's when my stuff was going on, you know? And so, you know, I got to see how, you know, being impacted in my formative years just had all kinds of destructive nature in my life. And I got to see equally how these guys would combat PTSD. We felt the same, but theirs was from different experiences, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember one time sharing my story about the suicide, and there was a few more pieces with it that were pretty difficult. But when I shared it with them, it's like all of their jaws dropped, even the facilitators, like they had nothing to say, you know. So then I realized then, okay, that is one of the differences between what the trauma you have and the trauma that you guys have and the trauma that I have. And so that was like some more awareness building. You know, it kind of taught me to, you know, start giving myself a break, you know, and don't be so hard on myself and things along that way. And some of the things that started to excite me about that too, because I think it's been just a few years now to where I've read about what they call post-traumatic growth. And that kind of has to do with someone going through all that kind of stuff and then turning it around and making it work for them, something to that effect. And so that's what I find myself in, because I still go through, it's like the haunting aspects of the trauma have been healed, I can say that, but the PTSD in a sense hasn't yet, you know. I don't know if it ever will, but I just employ different kind of mechanisms to help me go through it, you know, particularly like the depression, you know. And I used to be very grand in depression. I didn't even know I was depressed all of those darn years. And then it was kind of even strange there for a while that I was experiencing anxiety when I never used to experience that. I go through anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and even had to call emergency services a few times because I thought I was having a heart attack, you know.
It's your emotional world waking up, isn't it? Because when we dissociate, we can really numb out those feelings, isn't it?
Yeah. And then I remember something else which equally I played around with. It's called emotional freedom techniques.
Oh, is it the EFT, the tapping?
There you go. Yes. And that was about maybe maybe the late 90s or the early 2000s when I was going you know, learning that stuff, and even practiced it on clients that I was working with when anxiety would flare up upon them and such. That worked real good for the anxiety, I remember. And it was through a guy Gary Craig. I think he was a founder of that particular. The whole mess of people have taken off with it since then. Of course, it's been 20 some odd years or something like that.
Yeah. It's popular now, isn't it? You see a lot of videos on you see a lot of videos on this now. So you started it right from the beginning.
From the start.
Yeah.
And I remember I even bought some CDs and I watched them and all of that. And I mean, everything I used to get involved in, I would go full bore, you know. And and I guess that some of that now I look at upon it as like passion, because it for one, it engages me in activity which is proactive, because I can still get scared now and then with when little bouts of depression come about, because fear was just so profound in my life. It just a barrier. The fear would win all the time, and I still go through it sometimes where it'll evoke that anxiety, but it's not so bad no more. It's more so just being mindful of my depressive moods. I take a medication for it. I think it's in the Zoloft family, and I even fought with that for a while.
Yeah.
Because some people are pro medication and some people are not, and if you're alcoholic addict, you just hear all kinds of stuff, But
it is,
but
and they have studies showing that for people who had childhood trauma, that medication doesn't actually really work. It's almost like a placebo effect. If you really believe that this is going to help you, it will. But if you don't, it will make no difference. Yeah, it's very few people who feel that it has a lasting effect for them. Yeah, it's quite interesting one.
And this time around, I'm sticking with them, with the medication, and equally insomnia, equally too, that I deal with, but I got a medication for that too. So I've kind of accepted pieces like that as just adjuncts to my well-being,
Wow. Oops, we just lost connection. There seems to be a little bit of tech issues here.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not too practiced. That this is the first time I've done this Zoom, to be honest. I did it sometimes a while back because I was even in a board member for a suicide prevention program there for a little while, a few years ago. And now it's like I'm involved in this men's group. I ended up overcoming my fear of men in authority positions by having a talk with one man one time that upset me a lot. But I talked through it. And then I ended up breaking that barrier a lot, with men.
Beautiful.
And then now I belong to a men's group with the church, and what I found out through there, that there's this man there that wants me to become helpful with kids, young boys that went through trauma. So there's a lot of little things that open up like that, and for me, it's always a practice of being grateful also. Remaining humble, and my biggest job, I tell people, is getting out of my own way. And then I remember hearing another one which said something like this: I can't think my way into good living. I have to live my way into good thinking. And so that's what I've devoted a lot of this, I would say this last 10 going on 11 years. 10, 11 years or so. I'm going on 11 years in June. And it's just been profound, the impact on the changes in my life. And they mainly have to do with, taking nothing for granted, being grateful, and maintaining a contact with God, however that may be to folks. I know sometimes there's difficulty in taking that in, but you can kind of customize your own God. I was kind of told back in AA, and
beautiful.
And now it's like I'm trying to learn the religious side or the biblical side, because I know even AA came from the Bible, they were saying, So it's kind of like a lot of it feels like I'm going home, and almost like having my heaven here on earth in bits and pieces. There's still struggles. I'm not going to say no, but I don't like amp out like a circuit that trips. That doesn't happen no more where it used to in the past.
Yeah.
I would just go into some big time like an of avoidance behavior. Just pretend like there's nothing going on and just let it pass and blah blah blah. And then I have to come back and make the repairs afterwards.
Yes.
So that no longer happens because now I'll take care of when I get overwhelmed right there on the spot. As much as talk to people, most certainly don't keep it to my darn self. Don't let it fester, because then it attacks my body and attacks like feelings will store in the body, and I've even heard that sometimes, illnesses like cancer and all of that can even be attributed to unresolved anger. And like holistic approaches, I always pay attention to.
Yes.
And I look at the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual always. And there's always some of those areas I can be working in. The last frontier was the mental for me. Yes. I used to just imagine like I was in a four-passenger vehicle, and just make sure that mental is never in the front seat, and oftentimes mental is in the trunk, of my vehicle. But then I ended up learning some things about cognitive restructuring, and so all these tools that I just used to store upon my head started to come out and serve me these latter years, And,
isn't it? I always say we don't have to get rid of tools just because they didn't work. Just keep them in the toolbox. Maybe 5 years down the track, 10 years down the track, it's a perfect tool.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's how I've done it pretty much. And I've known of you for a little while over in your email, and I think it used to even be some social media here and there. And then when you invited me to this, I said, "Oh, that sounds nice," because this is the part about me wanting to go out there with it now,
Beautiful.
And then I thought, well, she's going to be doing me at 10:30. Oh my God, that's I'm way asleep by then, But anyway, I made the alarm because it's like going to be midnight here pretty soon, just about 10 minutes or so.
Wow.
But that's okay, It's okay because it had me excited about it when you put it out in email form, and I went ahead and said yes, and I'm grateful for it. Like I said, I just practice gratitude, and because these are all proactive activity. This is all proactive activity.
And
I've been more attentive. I've been more attentive to that post-traumatic growth stuff because it's pretty revealing too. And I'm just finding the arenas now where I can, share that part of me now. Where it's done good for me and not just all tore up by it. Yeah, it took me many years. 56 years old. 56 years from 5-6 years old to 56 years to get me on a healing path.
It takes time, does it? We have to be very patient. Patient.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm also very grateful that you took the time to share that with us, and I had no idea that it's middle of the night for you. So thank you so much for staying up and making that possible. Yeah. And inspiring other people, to be open and like you and learning and trying out new things. And so many things you shared with us, isn't it? Like a lot of group therapies from AA, grief support, tapping into those. You went to hospitals, all different centers to ask around, I guess, for people
Right.
where in your
Right.
community are support groups if you want to join that. And I think
Right,
you
right.
really EMDR and the EFT, the tapping's really been helpful, and the spirituality, the connection. I really love that. I totally agree with.
Journaling throughout life, journaling has been
Yeah.
real profound too, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like writing crystallizes thought, you know. A lot of times the thinking is good. It's just that I'm so darn used to not paying attention to, or I was so used to not paying attention to my thinking, you know.
Yes.
Because most of it was out the
Powerful.
window. I will say that, you know.
Yeah. So
But
powerful.
I know what was in my heart was true, and
Yeah.
you know, so that and there was always fight between my heart and my head. That's the biggest journey, they say, between your heart and your head. You know, if you can get around your head and let your heart speak, there's a lot of the wisdom right there, and the hope and the inspiration and all. You know.
Oh, beautiful. So people can still follow and learn from you and be inspired by your story. So that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're quite
It
welcome.
really
And thank
means
you
a
as
lot
well
to
for
me.
offering.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I hope you're having a good sleep today.
Okay, I will.